My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 34 years old, and the most important thing I own isn't my company. It isn't my house. It isn't my truck. It isn't even the savings account I spent 12 years building. It's a thick red notebook. A notebook so worn out that the corners are peeling. A notebook held together by tape. A notebook stained with coffee, rainwater, and tears. Especially tears. If you opened it today, you'd find hundreds of pages written in red ink. Dates, names, promises, amounts, regrets, truths. Most people would see paper. I see proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I wasn't selfish. Proof that I survived. That notebook saved my life. And this story begins with the very first page. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 34 years old. I own Carter Landscape and Design, and I'm the mother of a 7-year-old little girl named Sophie. Everything I've ever done has been for her. Everything. Every 18-hour workday, every missed holiday, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, all of it was for Sophie. That's why what happened hurt so much, because when my family betrayed me, they weren't just risking my future, they were risking hers. The first page. The thick red notebook didn't start as evidence. It didn't start as a journal. It didn't start as proof. It started in a hospital room, 7 years earlier, the night Sophie was born. I still remember holding her for the first time. Tiny fingers, tiny nose, tiny heartbeat against my chest. I remember looking at her and feeling terrified, not because I didn't love her, because I loved her so much. Her father had already left, 2 months before she was born. One day he packed his bags, the next day he was gone. No dramatic fight, no explanation, just absence. And suddenly I was alone, 27 years old, pregnant, scared, trying to figure out how I was going to raise a child by myself. That night in the hospital, a nurse handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a thick red notebook. Nothing fancy, just a notebook. But I opened it anyway, and on the first page I wrote, "For Sophie." Then beneath it, "Everything I build from this day forward is for you." I had no idea those words would eventually become the most important promise I'd ever make. Building a life. The first 3 years were brutal. Not difficult. Brutal. I worked during the day, handled paperwork at night, fed Sophie at midnight, answered clients at 2 in the morning, then woke up and did it again, and again, and again. The notebook traveled everywhere with me. Construction sites, client meetings, bank appointments. Every goal went into the notebook. Every expense, every lesson, every mistake. When I landed my first major contract, I wrote it in the notebook. When I hired my first employee, I wrote it in the notebook. When I paid off company debt, I wrote it in the notebook. The notebook became the story of a woman trying desperately not to fail. Because failure wasn't an option. Failure meant Sophie losing opportunities. Failure meant Sophie growing up the way I did. Always worried about money. Always worried about tomorrow. I refused to let that happen. So I worked. Harder than anyone knew. There were nights I'd sleep in my office. Nights I'd wake up in panic because payroll was due and an invoice hadn't cleared. Nights I'd sit alone in the dark wondering if I was destroying myself trying to build a future. But every time I doubted myself, I'd open the notebook and see those first 2 words, "For Sophie." Then I'd keep going. The thing's success. Cost people always admire success. They rarely admire the cost. Nobody saw me miss Sophie's first dance recital because a commercial project failed inspection. Nobody saw me cry in my truck afterward. I watched the recital video alone at midnight, 3 times, because guilt doesn't disappear after one viewing. Nobody saw me miss her school award ceremony, or her class picnic, or the Mother's Day breakfast her teacher spent weeks preparing. I missed that too. And the worst part? Sophie never complained. Never once. She'd simply smile and say, "It's okay, Mommy." That somehow hurt even more, because children should never have to comfort their parents. Then there was the hospital visit, the one nobody knew about, not even my mother. 3 years before everything happened, I collapsed in my office. Chest pain, dizziness, shortness of breath. I genuinely thought I was having a heart attack. The doctor later called it stress. I called it survival. Because I couldn't afford to stop. Not with Sophie depending on me. Not with 20 employees depending on me. Not with a company balanced on my shoulders. Then came Daniel. The man I almost married. The good man I lost. One night he sat across from me at dinner, completely silent. Finally he said, "I feel like your business gets the best version of you." I already knew where the conversation was heading, because deep down, he was right. A month later he left, and I wrote another entry inside the thick red notebook. Success always costs something. Today it costs love. I cried while writing that one. Ethan Carter. Then there was my brother. Ethan Carter. 30 years old, charming, funny, confident. The kind of man who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 10 new friends. People loved Ethan, including me. Especially me. Growing up, he was my best friend. When Dad lost his job, we survived together. When Mom cried, we comforted each other. When life got hard, Ethan always knew how to make me laugh. Or at least, that's who I thought he was. Looking back now, I see things differently. Because Ethan had a habit. Whenever life became difficult, someone rescued him. Mom, Dad, friends, me. There was always a safety net, always another chance, always another excuse. The consequences never fully arrived, and eventually people stop fearing consequences when they're never forced to face them. The request. It happened on a Tuesday, a rainy Tuesday, the kind of afternoon that makes everything feel gray. Ethan walked into my office carrying a leather folder. The moment I saw the folder, I knew. Money. It was always money. He sat down, smiled, and spent 40 minutes explaining an investment opportunity, commercial property, investors, returns, expansion, profit. Everything sounded perfect. Too perfect. Finally, I asked, "How much?" His answer came instantly. 50,000. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. No. His smile disappeared. Immediately. For a second, I saw something flash across his face. Annoyance. Then it vanished. And the manipulation began. He talked about family. He talked about loyalty. He talked about believing in people. Then he delivered the sentence that would haunt me later. The only person who doesn't believe in me is my own sister. That hurt. Because Ethan knew exactly where to aim. Not at my wallet, at my heart. I still said no. 3 times. That should have been the end. Instead, it became the beginning. The pressure campaign. 2 days later, my mother called, then Aunt Susan, then Uncle Frank, then my cousin Rachel, then my mother again. By the end of the week, it felt like the entire family had launched a campaign. He's trying. Everybody deserves another chance. Family helps family. You're the only one who can save him. Nobody asked how many years it took me to earn $50,000. Nobody asked what would happen if I lost it. Nobody asked what that money represented, because to them it was just money. To me, it was years of missed moments with Sophie. Years. Every dollar carried a memory, a sacrifice, a cost. Then came Sunday dinner. The dinner that changed everything. Halfway through dessert, Mom finally said it. "Olivia, you're the only person who can help him." The room became silent. Everyone watched me, waiting, expecting, pressuring. Even Sophie looked up from her coloring book. And suddenly I saw exactly what was at stake. Not money, her. Everything was her. That night after Sophie went to sleep, I sat alone in my office. The building was dark. The thick red notebook sat open in front of me. I stared at the first page. For Sophie. Then I turned to a blank page and wrote, "Everyone wants me to take the risk. Nobody wants to share it." I stared at those words, then wrote one final sentence beneath them. The sentence that would eventually break my heart. "If this destroys me, let these pages remember I tried." I underlined it twice, closed the notebook, and 3 days later, I transferred $50,000 to Ethan Carter. At the time, I thought I was helping family. I had no idea I had just funded the biggest betrayal of my life. And I definitely didn't know that 1 year later, that same thick red notebook would be sitting in the center of Grandpa's birthday party, while 32 relatives sat frozen in silence. And my mother cried so hard she could barely stand. Because the notebook wasn't finished writing my story, not even close. The first payment was supposed to arrive 90 days later. I know the exact date, not because I have a good memory, because it was written inside the thick red notebook. By then, the notebook lived on my desk, always open, always nearby. Some people kept family photos, some people kept journals. I kept records. Because life had taught me something important. People forget what they promised. Paper doesn't. 90 days came, then disappeared. No payment, no phone call, no explanation, nothing. I checked the company account 4 times that morning, then 4 more times that afternoon. Still nothing. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Not panic. Not yet. Something worse. Doubt. That night, after Sophie went to bed, I opened the thick red notebook, turned to Ethan's section, and wrote, June 22nd, first payment due. No payment received. No explanation given. Then underneath, first promise broken. I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Something about them felt important, like the first crack in a windshield. Small, but impossible to ignore once you notice it. The next morning I called Ethan. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Hours later a text arrived. Relax, the deal got delayed. Relax. That word made me furious. Not because of what it meant, because of what it ignored. $50,000 wasn't just money. It was Sophie's future. It was years of sacrifice. It was every dance recital I'd missed, every holiday I worked through, every sleepless night. And somehow Ethan talked about it like he was returning a lawnmower. That evening I copied the message into the notebook, word for word, then wrote underneath, when someone owes you the truth, they often offer comfort instead. 3 days later I drove past Ethan's house and saw the truck. Brand new, black, lifted, expensive. The kind of truck people buy when they want everyone to notice. I pulled over across the street and just stared. Rain tapped against my windshield. My stomach sank. Because suddenly one question wouldn't leave me alone. If the investment was delayed, why was Ethan spending money? That question followed me everywhere. To work, to bed, to meetings. It sat in the back of my mind like a warning siren. Finally, I drove to his house. I needed answers. The moment he opened the door, his smile disappeared. That told me everything. Inside, things were different. New television, new furniture, new appliances. Everything looked upgraded. The investment seemed delayed. The spending didn't. I sat down, then asked the only question that mattered. Where's my money? Ethan sighed dramatically, like I was inconveniencing him. Liv, I'm handling it. Handling what? The situation. What situation? The investment. I leaned forward. Show me the paperwork. Silence. A long silence. The kind that answers questions. His eyes shifted. Then he changed the subject. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Because innocent people answer questions. Liars avoid them. I drove home feeling sick. Not because of the money. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't trust my brother. That realization hurt more than I expected. That night, the thick red notebook changed forever. Until then, it had been a business notebook. Goals, contracts, plans, dreams. That night, it became something else. A survival notebook. A record. A witness. Proof. I created a new section. Ethan. Then below it, promises, excuses, contradictions, missed payments. Every call went into the notebook. Every text. Every date. Every conversation. Everything. I didn't know it then. But I was building the thing that would eventually save me. The thing that would prove I wasn't imagining any of this. The thing that would one day silence an entire room. The thick red notebook was no longer recording business. It was recording betrayal. And the pages started filling fast. Then the gossip began. Small towns are strange. Good news travels slowly. Bad news travels instantly. Within weeks, people were talking. At church, at the grocery store, at the diner, at baseball games, everywhere. Apparently, I was greedy. Apparently, I cared more about money than family. Apparently, I was trying to ruin Ethan's life. Funny. Nobody seemed worried about the money Ethan took, only the fact that I wanted it back. One afternoon, I walked into Mason's diner. Conversations stopped, not slowed, stopped. I immediately understood. People had been talking about me. Again. I sat alone with my coffee, and for the first time in years, I felt completely isolated, which made no sense, because I wasn't alone. I had Sophie. Yet somehow betrayal has a way of making you feel abandoned even in a crowded room. That evening, Sophie came home unusually quiet. Normally, she talked nonstop, about school, friends, teachers, cartoons. That day, she barely spoke. Halfway through dinner, she finally looked up. "Mom?" Something in her voice scared me. "Yeah, sweetheart?" She hesitated, then asked, "Are we losing the company?" The fork slipped from my hand. "What?" She looked down. "A girl at school said Uncle Ethan told people your business is failing." My heart shattered. Not because of the rumor, because it had reached my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter, the child I built everything for, the child I was trying to protect. Now she was carrying pieces of my nightmare. I moved beside her immediately, wrapped my arms around her. "It's not true." She looked up. "Promise?" I smiled. The kind of smile parents give when they're terrified. "Promise." But later that night, alone in my office, I wasn't so sure. Because for the first time in years, I was afraid. Truly afraid. If clients kept leaving, if rumors kept spreading, if projects slowed down, what happened then? What happened to Sophie? What happened to everything I'd built? I sat there staring at payroll reports, then at contracts, then at the notebook. And suddenly I realized something. I wasn't fighting for $50,000 anymore. I was fighting for my daughter's future, and losing wasn't an option. Around midnight, there was a knock on my office door. Rachel, my operations manager, my first employee, my closest friend. Rachel had been with me for 6 years. She knew about the panic attacks, the hospital visit, the broken engagement, the sacrifices, everything. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. Without saying a word, she sat down across from me, then slid a coffee toward me. "I heard what people are saying." I sighed. "So has everyone else." Rachel shook her head. "No." I looked up. She smiled. "They're hearing stories." Then she pointed at the notebook. "I know the truth." I nearly cried, because sometimes one loyal person is worth more than an entire crowd. That night, I opened the notebook, turned to a blank page, and wrote, "When my family doubted me, Rachel stayed." Then underneath, "Blood made us related. Loyalty made us family." Years later, that would become one of my favorite pages, because betrayal teaches you who left. Loyalty teaches you who remained. 3 weeks later, I hired a lawyer. 2 weeks after that, my lawyer called. His voice sounded unusually serious. Olivia. Yeah? A pause. Then 6 words that changed everything. I think there are other victims. My stomach tightened instantly. What do you mean? Another pause. Then, I think Ethan has done this before. I looked down at the thick red notebook, at dozens of pages filled with red ink, at months of lies, excuses, promises, and for the first time, I realized something terrifying. Maybe I wasn't documenting one betrayal. Maybe I was uncovering a pattern much bigger than me, a pattern that was about to pull the entire town into the light. And when the investigator finally started uncovering names, the thick red notebook would stop being a survival record and become a weapon made entirely of truth. The investigator's name was Mark Reynolds, and the first thing he said to me made my stomach drop. We were sitting in a small office above a law firm 2 towns away. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The room smelled like old coffee and paper. Between us sat my thick red notebook. Mark spent nearly 10 minutes flipping through it, page after page, red ink, dates, messages, promises, excuses. Finally, he closed it, rested his hand on the cover, and looked directly at me. Most victims remember feelings. I frowned. He tapped the notebook. You remembered facts. Silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. Olivia, this notebook may be the reason nobody can rewrite what happened to you. That sentence stayed with me, because by then the notebook had become something much bigger than paper. It started as a business tool, then became a survival record. Now it was becoming proof. Proof that I wasn't greedy, proof that I wasn't crazy, proof that I wasn't the villain, proof that I had been telling the truth all along. Over the next 6 weeks, Mark investigated Ethan, and my life got worse, much worse. Because while Mark was uncovering facts, the town was still feeding on rumors. A few clients quietly canceled contracts, nothing catastrophic, but enough to scare me, enough to keep me awake at night. Every cancellation felt personal. Every cancellation felt like Ethan reaching into my future and stealing something from Sophie. One evening, I sat alone in my office reviewing payroll. Again, then invoices. Again, then payroll. Again. The numbers were fine. Yet I couldn't stop checking. Because fear isn't logical. Fear doesn't care about spreadsheets. Fear only asks one question. What if everything falls apart? I looked at the framed photo beside my desk. Sophie. Missing front tooth. Huge smile. Holding a trophy from a school reading competition. A competition I almost missed because of work. My chest tightened. Everything I had built existed because I wanted her life to be easier than mine, and now I was terrified someone else's lies might destroy it. That night, I stayed at the office until almost 4 a.m. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell asleep at my desk, my head resting beside the thick red notebook. When I woke up, someone had placed a blanket over my shoulders. Rachel. Of course it was Rachel. She sat across from me drinking coffee. The office was still dark outside. Morning. I checked the clock. 4:51 a.m. Please tell me you didn't stay all night. Rachel laughed. Please tell me you didn't. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then something inside me cracked. Not dramatically, quietly. The way overloaded bridges crack before they collapse. I started crying. Not because of Ethan, not because of the money, because I was tired. So unbelievably tired. Tired of defending myself. Tired of worrying. Tired of carrying everything. Rachel moved her chair closer. She didn't offer advice. She didn't offer solutions. She simply stayed. And somehow that meant more. Because loyalty is often silent. The people who truly love you don't always know what to say. They just refuse to leave. 3 days later, Mark called. His voice sounded different, focused, sharp, urgent. "Olivia, I need you to come in." My stomach tightened immediately. "What happened?" A pause, then 4 words. "I found another victim." I drove there immediately. When I arrived, a thick folder sat on his desk. Mark opened it. Inside were bank statements, loan records, text messages, emails, transfers, and names. Lots of names. The first victim was a retired principal, $21,000. The second was a contractor, $15,000. The third was a widower, $9,000. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth. Every page looked different, yet every story felt identical. Ethan asked for help. Ethan made promises. Ethan disappeared. I sat there staring at the documents, unable to speak, because suddenly I wasn't looking at a bad decision. I was looking at a pattern years old. Then Mark slid another document toward me, and my heart stopped, because I recognized the name immediately. Susan Walker, my aunt. The same aunt who called me selfish. The same aunt who spent months defending Ethan. The same aunt who said family should forgive family. 3 years earlier, Ethan borrowed $18,000 from her and never repaid it. I stared at the paper. My hands started shaking. Because suddenly everything made sense. Her defensiveness, her excuses, her pressure. She wasn't protecting Ethan. She was protecting her own embarrassment. Because admitting I was right meant admitting she'd been fooled too. And pride can make people defend the very thing hurting them. Then Mark handed me another document. Then another. Then another. Names I knew. People from church. People from town. People from family gatherings. Victims. Everywhere. By the time the meeting ended, I felt physically sick. I drove straight to my office, opened the thick red notebook, and created a new section. Victims. Then I started writing. Carl Benson, $21,000. David Hines, $15,000. Robert Miller, $9,000. Susan Walker, $18,000. Then more names, and more, page after page. The notebook kept growing, thicker, heavier, like it was carrying the weight nobody else wanted to acknowledge. Then something happened that hurt more than all the numbers combined. 2 days later, Sophie came home crying, actually crying. The moment I saw her face, my heart dropped. I rushed toward her. "Sweetheart?" She immediately wrapped her arms around me. Tight, too tight, a scared hug, the kind children give when they're carrying something too heavy. "Mom," her voice shook. "Can I ask you something?" I knelt beside her. "Anything." She hesitated, then asked the question that broke me. "Mom," tears filled her eyes. "If everyone thinks you're bad," her voice cracked, "does that make it true?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because children are supposed to ask about cartoons, or birthdays, or ice cream. Not this. Never this. I pulled her into my arms and held her, tightly as she'd held me. Then I whispered, "No, sweetheart." She cried quietly against my shoulder. And I realized something. The gossip wasn't hurting me anymore. It was hurting her, the one person I was trying to protect. That night, after Sophie went to sleep, I sat alone in her room, watching her, listening to her breathe. And for the first time in months, I felt completely broken. I had a daughter. People loved me. I wasn't physically alone. Yet somehow I had never felt lonelier. Because betrayal creates a loneliness that crowds can't fix. I looked toward the hallway, toward the office where the thick red notebook sat waiting, then quietly walked there, opened it, and wrote one of the hardest entries I'd ever written. Today, Sophie paid part of the price for trusting Ethan. I stared at those words through tears, then added another line beneath them. That is something I will never forgive. For a long time, I just sat there, looking at the notebook, thinking, Then my phone rang. Mom. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something told me to answer. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something had changed. She sounded different. Smaller. Broken. Olivia. A pause. Then 4 words. He lied to me. My stomach tightened. What happened? Silence. Then I heard her crying. Real crying. The kind you can't fake. The kind that comes from discovering a truth you've spent years avoiding. Can you come over? When I arrived, she was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of her sat a stack of bank statements almost as thick as the red notebook itself. And for the first time in her life, my mother was about to discover what protecting Ethan had truly cost her. Not just money, not just trust, but the daughter who had been telling the truth all along. When I arrived at my mother's house, she looked 10 years older. Not older because of age, older because of truth. Some truths age people overnight. She sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table where we had celebrated birthdays. The same table where she had convinced me to help Ethan. The same table where she'd spent months defending him. And now sitting in front of her was a stack of bank statements, a stack almost as thick as my red notebook. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she pushed the papers toward me, with shaking hands. I started reading. Transfer, transfer, transfer. Withdrawal, check, transfer. Again, and again, and again. Different years, different amounts, same destination. Ethan. By the time I finished, my stomach hurt. Because the total wasn't small. It wasn't even close. $48,000. $48,000. Nearly the same amount he took from me. My mother stared at the table, unable to look at me. I thought I was helping him. Her voice cracked. Every word sounded broken. He always promised he'd pay it back. Silence. He always sounded sincere. More silence. He always knew exactly what to say. I closed my eyes. Because for the first time, she was finally seeing what I had seen. Not the charming version, not the family version, the real version. And realizing you've spent years protecting the wrong person is a special kind of pain. That night, I drove home and opened the thick red notebook. The notebook felt different, heavier, almost alive, like it had been carrying the truth while everyone else carried excuses. I turned to a blank page, then wrote, Mom finally saw the numbers. A pause. Then another line. Truth arrives quietly, then destroys everything built against it. I underlined it twice. Because I knew something had changed. The first wall protecting Ethan had cracked, and once cracks appear, they spread. Over the next 2 weeks, the town started changing. At first it was subtle, then it became impossible to ignore. People who had criticized me suddenly became quiet. People who defended Ethan stopped bringing him up. Rumors began traveling in the opposite direction. Victims started finding each other. One person told another, then another, then another. Soon everyone realized the stories were nearly identical. The same promises, the same emergencies, the same excuses, the same ending. Money gone, trust gone, Ethan gone. One afternoon, I walked into Mason's diner, the same diner where conversations used to stop when I entered. This time, something different happened. An older man stood up from his table. I recognized him immediately. 3 months earlier, he'd publicly criticized me. Now he looked embarrassed, deeply embarrassed. Olivia, I stopped. I owe you an apology. Silence. I believed the wrong person. Then he sat back down. That was it. No speech, no excuses, no justification, just accountability. And somehow that meant everything. Because accountability had become incredibly rare. Then came the night everything almost fell apart. Mom called, crying, "Can you come over?" The moment I arrived, my stomach dropped. Ethan's truck sat in the driveway. So did Aunt Susan's car, and Uncle Frank's, and 2 cousins. Immediately I understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. When I entered the dining room, everyone was already seated. Everyone except me. That told me everything. I remained standing. Nobody invited me to sit. Because this wasn't about listening. It was about pressure. Again. Only this time the stakes were much higher. Mom started first. Tears already running down her face. "Olivia." I stayed silent. "I know Ethan made mistakes." Mistakes. Interesting choice of words. Not theft. Not manipulation. Mistakes. Then came the real reason I was there. I just don't want this family destroyed. There it was. The final defense. Peace at any cost. Even if the cost was truth. For nearly 40 minutes, everyone took turns speaking. Forgiveness. Second chances. Healing. Family. The same words. Different voices. Then Ethan finally spoke. His eyes looked red. Almost convincing. Almost. "Liv." I said nothing. "I know you're hurt." Silence. "I know you're angry." More silence. Then he looked toward Mom and fired the same weapon he'd always used. Guilt. "If you keep doing this," his voice broke, "you're going to destroy her." The room immediately turned toward me, waiting, expecting, hoping. The burden had somehow become mine again, just like always. I looked around the room, at every face. Then I thought about Sophie, the tears, the bullying, the question. If everyone thinks you're bad, does that make it true? Something inside me finally settled. Not exploded. Settled. The way a storm settles before becoming dangerous. Then I looked directly at Ethan and calmly said, "No." The room froze. Complete silence. For the first time all year, nobody rushed to rescue him. Then I turned toward my mother. Her face was soaked with tears, and despite everything, I still loved her, which made what I had to say even harder. "Mom." She looked up, shaking. "I need you to answer something." Silence. I took a slow breath, then asked the question that changed everything. When did protecting him become more important than loving me? The room went completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My mother's face collapsed. Actually collapsed. Because she had no answer. And the reason she had no answer was because she had been asking herself the same question for weeks. Tears poured down her face. I continued. Calm. Quiet. Which somehow hurt more than yelling. "You taught me to tell the truth." Silence. "You taught me honesty matters." More silence. "You taught me integrity matters." My voice cracked slightly. Then I finished. "And when I told the truth about Ethan," I swallowed hard. "You punished me for it." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Aunt Susan started crying. Even Uncle Frank looked down. Because nobody could argue. Nobody. The truth was sitting in the room with us, and everybody knew it. Then I reached into my bag and slowly removed the thick red notebook. The room immediately went still. Everyone recognized it. The notebook had become famous. The notebook that never forgot. The notebook that kept every promise after people stopped keeping theirs. I placed it on the table. Thud. The sound echoed through the room. Then I rested my hand on the cover and said, "This notebook started as a gift when Sophie was born." Nobody spoke. It became the story of everything I built for her. Silence. Then Ethan happened. My eyes met my mother's. and it became proof that I survived him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then I delivered the sentence nobody forgot. The difference between memory and truth, I tapped the notebook, is that truth doesn't change depending on who feels guilty. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked away. Then I stood, picked up the notebook, and walked toward the door. Halfway there, I stopped. Without turning around, I spoke one final sentence. Grandpa's birthday is next Saturday. Silence. Bring everyone. Confused looks appeared. Then I finally turned and looked directly at Ethan, for the first time all night. Every single person. His face lost color, because he understood immediately. The notebook was coming. The victims were coming. The truth was coming. And for the first time in his life, there would be nowhere left to hide. I walked out, leaving everyone speechless behind me. The following week was the longest week of Ethan Carter's life. The investigator finished his report. New victims came forward. The town completely turned. And every night before bed, I opened the thick red notebook. Not because I needed evidence anymore, but because it reminded me of something important. I wasn't carrying revenge. I was carrying truth. And at Grandpa's birthday party, that truth was about to break an entire room. Grandpa's birthday arrived on a cold Saturday evening, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid to tell the truth. Not because I doubted it, because I knew what it would cost. Some truths don't just expose lies, they expose the people who protected them. The banquet hall was already full when Sophie and I arrived. 32 relatives, family friends, neighbors, people who had known me my entire life. Laughter filled the room. Birthday decorations covered the walls. Children ran between tables. Grandpa smiled at everyone who walked through the door. From the outside, it looked perfect. But sitting beside my chair was the thick red notebook. And inside that notebook was enough truth to change every relationship in the room. Sophie noticed my hand resting on the cover. She gently touched my arm. "Mom?" I looked down. Her small face looked worried. The same face that had cried because other children repeated lies about me. The same face that had asked if everyone believing something made it true. "Are you okay?" For a second, I couldn't answer. Because suddenly I realized why this mattered so much. Not the money, not Ethan, not even the investigation. Sophie. One day she would learn how people treat you when standing up for yourself becomes inconvenient. One day she would have to choose between being liked and being respected. And I wanted her to know something. The truth is worth the loneliness, even when it hurts. I kissed her forehead. "I'm okay." She smiled, then squeezed my hand and whispered, "I believe you." Those 3 words almost broke me, because for months I'd been fighting an entire town, and the person whose opinion mattered most had never doubted me. Never once. Across the room, Ethan watched us. Nervous. Very nervous. He kept glancing at the notebook, then looking away, then looking back again. Because he knew. The notebook wasn't coming to dinner. The notebook had come for him. Dinner continued. Cake was served. Grandpa opened gifts. People laughed. And through all of it, the notebook sat quietly beside me, waiting. Finally, Grandpa stood, raised his glass, and thanked everyone for coming. Then he smiled. "Anybody got anything they'd like to say?" The room laughed. Then I stood. Immediately the room became silent. Every conversation stopped. Every chair turned. Every eye found me. And somehow the notebook suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. I picked it up. Slowly. Carefully. Like it was carrying something fragile. Because it was. My trust. My sacrifices. My pain. My truth. I walked to the center of the room, then placed the thick red notebook on Grandpa's table. The sound echoed through the hall. Thud. Silence followed. Absolute silence. I opened the notebook. The red pages stared back at me. Years of my life captured in ink. And suddenly I remembered the first page. The hospital room. The newborn baby in my arms. The promise. For Sophie. My throat tightened. Then I looked around the room. At every relative. Every person who had judged me. Every person who had pressured me. Every person who had chosen comfort over truth. And finally, I began. My name is Olivia Carter. Silence. This notebook started the day my daughter was born. Nobody moved. It recorded every contract I fought for. Page turn. Every goal. Page turn. Every sacrifice. Page turn. Every dream I had for her. I looked at Sophie. Tears already filled her eyes. Then my voice hardened. And eventually, I touched the notebook. It became a record of betrayal. The room froze. I turned to Ethan's section, then started reading. Dates, promises, missed payments, excuses, text messages, contradictions, one after another, calmly, slowly, relentlessly. No anger, no screaming, just facts. The truth doesn't need volume, only light. Then I reached the victim pages and started reading names. Carl Benson, $21,000. David Hines, $15,000. Robert Miller, $9,000. Susan Walker, $18,000. Gasps spread across the room. Aunt Susan lowered her head, unable to look at anyone. Then I turned another page, the page that mattered most. My mother's page. The room became so quiet I could hear someone breathing. I looked directly at Mom. She was already crying. Because she knew. She knew exactly what came next. Still, hearing it was different. I read every transfer, every date, every promise, every repayment that never happened. Then finally spoke the number, $48,000. A collective gasp filled the room. Mom covered her face. Tears poured through her fingers. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because this wasn't really about money. It never was. I slowly closed the notebook, then looked directly at her. The entire room disappeared. It felt like only the two of us remained. Mother, daughter, years of love, years of damage. And one question. My voice barely rose above a whisper. Mom. She looked up. Broken. Completely broken. Then I asked the question that had lived inside me for months. When I told you the truth, my voice cracked. Why wasn't I enough? The room froze. Not because of the question, because of the pain inside it. Tears immediately streamed down my mother's face. I continued, still calm, still gentle, which somehow made it worse. I lost sleep. Silence. I lost customers. Silence. I watched my daughter cry. More silence. And every time I asked for help, my voice trembled. You asked me to help him instead. My mother broke. Actually broke. A sound escaped her that I'll never forget. The sound of guilt finally collapsing under its own weight. She stood, then walked toward me, shaking so badly she could barely stay upright. The entire room watched. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Mom stopped directly in front of me, then said the words she'd been avoiding for almost a year. I failed you. I closed my eyes, because that was all I had ever wanted. Not victory, not revenge. Truth, just truth. She grabbed my hands, crying uncontrollably. I was so afraid of losing him. Her voice shattered. That I stopped seeing I was losing you. The room erupted into tears. Aunts, cousins, friends. Even Grandpa was crying. Because everyone understood something. This wasn't about a loan. This was about a daughter who spent her entire life being strong, and a mother who only realized it after she almost lost her. Then Mom said something nobody expected. She turned toward the room, toward everyone, and publicly said, Olivia was telling the truth. Silence. I pressured her. More silence. I blamed her. Tears. And I was wrong. Nobody looked away, because accountability had finally entered the room. Across the hall, Ethan suddenly stood, his face pale, his hands shaking, and for one brief second I thought he might apologize. Instead, he walked out. Again, running from consequences, the same way he'd run his entire life. Only this time nobody followed him, nobody rescued him, nobody defended him, because the truth had finally become heavier than the excuses. 3 months later, the investigation became official. More victims came forward, documents surfaced, evidence accumulated, and for the first time in his life, Ethan couldn't charm his way out. Then one night my phone rang. Unknown number. It was Ethan. Crying. Actually crying. Not angry, not defensive. Broken. Olivia. Silence. Please help me. The irony almost hurt, because for the first time, he was finally facing what everyone else had faced because of him. I looked at the thick red notebook, then quietly answered, I already did, and ended the call. 1 year later, life looked different. The company expanded, revenue grew, new contracts arrived. But none of that mattered as much as one thing. I got my life back. I stopped missing Sophie's moments. Dance recitals, school plays, field trips, birthdays, everything. One afternoon, I watched Sophie perform on stage. She found me in the crowd, smiled, and waved. For the first time in years, I wasn't late. I wasn't absent. I was there. Rachel became my business partner, not employee. Partner, because when everyone else questioned me, she stayed. When family abandoned me, she stayed. When the town turned, she stayed. Blood made Ethan my brother. Loyalty made Rachel my family. My relationship with Mom healed slowly, painfully, but honestly. Trust takes time, yet effort matters, and she never stopped trying. One evening she visited my office. The sun was setting. Sophie sat nearby doing homework. The thick red notebook rested on my desk. Older now, worn, faded, but still there. Sophie looked at it, then asked, Mom? I smiled. Yeah? She pointed at the notebook. Why do you keep it? The room became quiet. Mom looked at me too, waiting. I gently placed my hand on the red cover, the same cover that had witnessed everything, then answered, Because this notebook doesn't remind me who betrayed me. Sophie listened carefully. It reminds me what survived. Silence. Soft. Warm. Healing. Then I added one final lesson. The lesson this entire story gave me. Family isn't the people who demand your sacrifice. Family is the people who respect what your sacrifice cost. Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which relationships were only surviving because you had none. And accountability isn't the opposite of love. It's proof that love is honest. Because blood can make you related. Love can make you family. But accountability is what proves the difference. And that is why the thick red notebook will stay on my desk forever. Not as a record of betrayal, but as proof that truth survives, even when almost nobody wants to hear it. The moment Ethan asked for $5,000, I already knew my answer. No, absolutely not. But the way my mother looked at me made it clear she expected something different. Not a discussion, not a decision, compliance. I leaned back in my chair. Ethan, what exactly is this business? Immediately, his eyes lit up, as if he'd rehearsed this moment. For the next 15 minutes, he talked nonstop. Investment opportunities, private partners, huge returns, expansion plans, exclusive access, ground floor opportunities, financial freedom, the usual buzzwords, lots of words, very few facts. The longer he talked, the less sense it made. Every time I asked a specific question, he changed the subject. Every answer created 3 new questions, and eventually, I stopped listening. Because I had heard this speech before. Different business, same Ethan. When he finally stopped talking, Mom smiled. See? It's a great opportunity. I looked at her, then at him, then back at her. No. The room went silent. Mom blinked. What? No. Ethan laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. I'm not giving you $50,000. His smile disappeared. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mom leaned forward. Sarah, he's your brother. And? The word came out colder than I intended. But I was tired. Tired of being treated like the family's emergency fund. Tired of being expected to fix everyone's mistakes. Tired of pretending everything was normal. Mom looked offended. Family helps family. I nodded. I've helped family for years. And it was true. I had paid Ethan's rent twice, covered one of his car payments, helped with credit card debt, paid for emergency expenses, and every single time I was promised repayment. Every single time. The money never came back. Not once. Ethan crossed his arms. So that's it? I looked directly at him. Yes. His face hardened immediately. The charming, funny version of Ethan disappeared. And for a moment, I saw the real person underneath. A person I didn't recognize. You have the money. The way he said it made my stomach turn. Not because he was asking, because he sounded entitled. I worked for that money. You got lucky. The sentence hit me like a slap. Lucky? Lucky? I remembered sleeping on my office couch, missing birthdays, working weekends, taking client calls at midnight, building a company from nothing, and somehow that was luck? I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Mom immediately jumped in. He didn't mean it like that. But Ethan didn't deny it. Not even a little. Because he meant exactly what he said. For the first time in my life, I realized something painful. They genuinely believed my success belonged to them. Not because they helped build it, because they were related to me. And that terrified me. I stood up. I'm leaving. Mom followed me to the door. Her voice dropped low. You know your father would have helped Ethan. I froze, because she had no right to use Dad. None. Especially when Dad wasn't there to defend himself. I turned slowly. No. Mom frowned. Dad would have told Ethan to take responsibility for his own life. For a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Fear. Then it disappeared. So quickly I almost missed it. Almost. I drove home feeling sick. Not because of the argument, because of that look. Fear. Why would mentioning Dad make her nervous? The question stayed with me for days. Then one evening, Sophie came running into the kitchen. Mama! I smiled immediately. No matter how difficult life became, Sophie always made everything better. She handed me a folded paper. My teacher said this was important. I unfolded it. School fundraiser information. Nothing unusual. Until another piece of paper slipped out. A smaller note, folded tightly. My smile disappeared, because I recognized the handwriting immediately. Ethan. My heart started racing. Slowly, I unfolded the note. There was only one sentence written on it. You should have helped when you had the chance. A chill ran down my spine. What was that supposed to mean? And how had Ethan managed to get a note into Sophie's school papers? I flipped the note over. There was something written on the back, smaller, almost hidden. My breath caught, because the second sentence changed everything. Ask Mom where Dad's red notebook really went. I stared at the words, again, and again, and again. The red notebook. Dad's notebook. The notebook that vanished after his funeral. The notebook Mom claimed had been lost. Suddenly, memories started flooding back. Dad carrying it everywhere, writing inside it constantly, locking it away when guests visited, never letting anyone touch it. And then, it simply disappeared. Gone. As if it had never existed. For years, I accepted Mom's explanation. Now I wasn't so sure. Because one thing became painfully clear. Ethan knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. And if he was bringing up the notebook now, then whatever was inside it had to be important. Very important. That night, after Sophie went to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking. At midnight, I opened an old storage box in my closet. A box filled with things I couldn't bear to throw away after Dad died. Photographs, letters, birthday cards, old receipts, random memories. Hours passed. Then I found something. A photograph. At first it seemed ordinary. Then I looked closer, and my blood ran cold. Because Dad wasn't alone in the picture. Standing beside him was Mom, and in Dad's hand was the thick red notebook. But that wasn't what shocked me. What shocked me was the date. The photograph had been taken 3 weeks before Dad died, and written across the bottom in Dad's handwriting were 6 words. If anything happens, trust Rachel. Rachel, my father's old accountant. A woman I hadn't spoken to in almost 3 years. A woman who disappeared from our lives immediately after Dad's funeral. And suddenly, I knew exactly where I was going in the morning. Because if anyone knew the truth about the red notebook, it was Rachel. And deep down, I had a feeling that once I found her, nothing in my family would ever be the same again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. Dad's handwriting, the photograph, the words written across the bottom. If anything happens, trust Rachel. By 6 in the morning, I was already awake, coffee untouched, mind racing, heart pounding. Something deep inside me kept saying the same thing. Dad had left me a message, not directly, but intentionally. And after all these years, I was finally starting to see it. The moment Sophie left for school, I began searching for Rachel, Dad's former accountant, the woman who had managed almost every financial detail of his life for nearly 15 years. I found an old phone number, disconnected. Then an email, no response. Then an outdated office address, closed. For a moment, I thought I had reached a dead end, until I remembered something. Rachel wasn't just Dad's accountant. She was his friend, real friend, not the kind who appeared when money was involved, the kind who stayed when things became difficult. I spent the next 2 hours searching through old files. Then I found it, a Christmas card from 4 years ago. Inside was a handwritten note and a new address. My heart started racing. An hour later, I was standing outside a small brick house on the edge of town. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there she was, Rachel, older, a little grayer, but unmistakably Rachel. The moment she saw me, her face changed. Shock, then concern, then something else. Fear. The exact same fear I'd seen on Mom's face. Sarah? I nodded. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel quietly said, "You finally found me." My stomach dropped. Finally? What did that mean? Before I could ask, she stepped aside. "Come inside." The moment the door closed behind us, Rachel looked out the window, checking the street, checking the driveway, checking everything. It felt less like visiting an accountant and more like entering a witness protection program. "What is going on?" I asked. Rachel sat down slowly. Then she said something that changed everything. I've been waiting 3 years for this conversation. Silence. My heart felt like it stopped. 3 years. The exact amount of time since Dad died. Rachel took a deep breath. Before your father passed away, he gave me instructions. I leaned forward. What instructions? She stared directly into my eyes. If Sarah ever comes looking for answers, tell her the truth. A chill ran through my body, because suddenly this wasn't speculation anymore. Dad knew something was wrong, and he'd prepared for it. Rachel stood up, walked toward a cabinet, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a sealed envelope. My hands started shaking immediately. Written across the front in Dad's handwriting were 2 words. For Sarah. I couldn't breathe. 3 years. 3 years this envelope had been waiting. Rachel carefully handed it to me. I promised your father I would only give it to you if you came looking. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. I immediately recognized Dad's handwriting. And as I started reading, my entire world began to change. Sarah, if you're reading this, then something happened exactly the way I feared it would. My throat tightened. There are things about our family that you don't know, things I tried to ignore for years, things that eventually became impossible to ignore. I swallowed hard. The red notebook contains records, every loan, every transfer, every debt, every lie. My eyes widened. What? Every lie? I continued reading. For years, your brother Ethan secretly borrowed money from family members, friends, business contacts, and even people who trusted him professionally. Many of those debts were hidden. Some were covered up. Others were repaid using money that wasn't his. My hands started shaking. No, this couldn't be real. Could it? The Ethan I knew was irresponsible. But this was something else. Then I reached the next paragraph. And suddenly everything became worse. Much worse. Your mother knew. I froze. The room disappeared. Everything disappeared. Except those 3 words. Your mother knew. I read them again. And again. And again. Rachel quietly sat across from me, saying nothing, letting me process. Because she already knew what was coming next. And a few seconds later, I found out too. For years, I covered Ethan's debts to protect the family. I hoped he would change. I hoped your mother would stop enabling him. Neither happened. Tears filled my eyes. Dad knew. All of it. For years. The scams. The lies. The debt. Everything. And he had been protecting everyone from the consequences, including me. Then I reached the final paragraph. The paragraph that made my blood run cold. If the notebook disappears after my death, do not trust anyone who claims it was lost. Someone will take it. And that person already knows exactly what's inside. I slowly lowered the letter. The room felt silent. Too silent. Rachel looked at me. Now you understand why I was afraid. I nodded slowly. Because suddenly everything made sense. Mom's nervous behavior, Ethan's anger, the missing notebook, the pressure for money, all of it. The notebook wasn't missing. Someone had taken it. Intentionally. And according to Dad, that person knew exactly what they were hiding. I looked at Rachel. Do you know who took it? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up, walked toward another cabinet, opened a second drawer. Then she placed something on the table. A photocopied page. My heart nearly stopped, because at the top of the page were 3 handwritten words. Red notebook, private records. Rachel looked directly at me. I made copies before your father's funeral. My hands started trembling, because for the first time in 3 years, I was finally looking at evidence. Real evidence. And written halfway down the page was a name that shattered what little trust I still had left. Ethan Mitchell. Outstanding debt, $578. I stared at the number, unable to speak, unable to think, unable to breathe. Because suddenly I realized something terrifying. Ethan hadn't asked me for $5,000 to start a business. He had asked for almost the exact amount listed in Dad's records. And that could only mean one thing. The debt wasn't gone. It was still there, and someone was desperate to make it disappear. For almost a full minute, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the photocopied page. The number, the debt, the evidence. Ethan Mitchell. Outstanding debt, $578. The amount was too specific to be coincidence, too close to the $5,000 he had demanded from me. Suddenly, everything looked different. The desperate phone calls, the guilt trips, Mom's pressure, Ethan's anger. None of it had been about helping family. It had been about covering something up. Rachel quietly slid 2 more photocopied pages across the table. I looked down, and my stomach dropped. The pages weren't just about Ethan. They contained years of records, dates, amounts, names, handwritten notes from Dad. One note was circled in red ink. Paid Ethan's creditor to prevent legal action. Do not tell Sarah. I felt physically sick. Dad had spent years cleaning up Ethan's messes. Years. And somehow I never knew. Rachel folded her hands. Your father protected the family name. I looked at her. By sacrificing himself. She nodded. Yes. The sadness in her eyes told me everything. Dad had carried a burden alone, while everyone else pretended everything was normal. I suddenly remembered something. A conversation from years ago. Dad sitting quietly at Thanksgiving, Mom and Ethan laughing, everyone smiling. But Dad looked exhausted. At the time, I assumed it was work stress. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe he was tired of carrying everyone's secrets. Maybe he was tired of being the only adult in the room. Maybe he was tired of watching the people he loved lie to each other. I looked back at the records. Then I noticed another note. A note that made my blood run cold. Transferred funds from family account after discussion with M. M. My heart sank. Mom. There was no doubt. Rachel saw my reaction. Your father believed your mother was helping Ethan behind his back. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to reject it, to defend her, to believe there was some explanation. But deep down, I already knew. Because every piece fit perfectly. Too perfectly. For years, Mom wasn't protecting Ethan. She was enabling him. And Dad knew it. The realization hurt more than I can explain. Not because of the money. Because of trust. Because the people I loved most had been hiding the truth from me for years. Then Rachel reached into a folder. There's something else. My stomach tightened. Something else? How could there possibly be something worse? Rachel handed me another sheet. A bank transfer record. I looked at the date. 3 days after Dad's funeral. My pulse quickened. Then I saw the amount. $18,000. Transferred from an account I recognized immediately. Dad's emergency account. The account nobody except close family knew existed. I looked at the recipient name, and everything inside me froze. Recipient, Ethan Mitchell. I couldn't believe it. 3 days. 3 days after burying Dad. Ethan had already taken money. I felt tears forming, not because of the amount, because of what it revealed. Dad wasn't even gone a week, and someone was already helping themselves to his money. Rachel spoke softly. Your father predicted this. I looked up. What do you mean? Rachel opened another envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten page from the red notebook. At the bottom was Dad's signature, and beneath it were words that felt like a punch to the chest. If anything happens to me, watch the account activity carefully. I stared at the sentence. Dad knew. He knew. Maybe not exactly how everything would happen, but he knew enough to leave warnings, enough to leave a trail, enough to protect the truth. And suddenly I understood something. The red notebook wasn't just a notebook. It was evidence. Evidence someone desperately wanted buried. Which meant one thing. The original notebook still existed somewhere, and whoever had it was terrified of it being found. I looked at Rachel. Do you know where it is? She hesitated. For the first time all day, she looked genuinely uncertain. Then she slowly nodded. Maybe. My heart nearly stopped. Maybe? Rachel took a deep breath. A week before your father died, he told me something strange. I leaned forward. He said if the notebook ever disappeared, she paused. The first place Sarah should look is where the family pretends not to look. I frowned. What did that even mean? Rachel gave a sad smile. I didn't understand it either. Then suddenly, a memory flashed through my mind. So fast it almost disappeared. Dad's old lake cabin, the cabin nobody visited anymore, the cabin Mom refused to talk about, the cabin Ethan claimed should be sold years ago. The cabin. My heart started racing, because if there was one place my family avoided, it was that cabin. I stood up immediately. Rachel saw the look on my face. You know something. I nodded slowly. I think I know where to start. As I walked toward the door, Rachel stopped me. Sarah. I turned around. Her expression had become serious. Very serious. If you're right. I waited. And then she said the words that haunted me the entire drive home. Be prepared to discover that the betrayal was bigger than you think. I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. But deep down, I had a feeling I was about to find out. Because tomorrow morning, I was going to Dad's abandoned lake cabin. And if the red notebook was there, the truth would finally come out. No matter who it destroyed. The next morning, I left before sunrise. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't tell Ethan. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about keeping secrets from my family. Because after everything I had learned, one thing was clear. They had been keeping secrets from me for years. The drive to Dad's old lake cabin took almost 2 hours. The entire way my mind raced. What if the notebook wasn't there? What if Rachel was wrong? What if I was chasing a ghost? But deep down, I knew I had to try. Because if I didn't, I would spend the rest of my life wondering. The cabin looked exactly the same. Old wooden walls, small front porch, the same wind chimes Dad loved. For a moment, memories flooded back. Summer weekends, fishing trips, barbecues, laughter, family. Back when I still believed we were a family. I unlocked the door. Dust covered everything. Nobody had been there in years. At first, I found nothing. Closets, drawers, cabinets, boxes, nothing. Hours passed. My hopes slowly started fading. Then I remembered something. A phrase Dad used constantly whenever we played hide and seek when I was little. The best hiding places are always the obvious ones. I froze. The obvious place. Slowly, I walked toward the stone fireplace. Dad loved that fireplace. Built it himself. Always sat beside it writing in that thick red notebook. My heart started pounding. I knelt down, tapped several stones. Nothing. Then I found one that sounded hollow. My breath caught. Carefully, I pulled it forward. And suddenly, a hidden compartment appeared. Inside was a small metal box. For a second, I couldn't move. I just stared. Because somehow, I already knew. Slowly, I opened it. And there it was. The thick red notebook. After 3 years, after countless lies, after endless secrets, I finally had it. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of the notebook, because it felt like finding a piece of Dad again. A final message. a final gift, a final truth. My hands trembled as I opened the first page, and almost immediately, everything changed. The notebook contained far more than financial records. There were dates, receipts, bank transfers, emails, personal notes. Dad had documented everything. Everything. Years of information, years of lies, years of cover-ups. Then I reached a page marked with a red tab. At the top, Dad had written, "If Sarah ever reads this, she deserves the whole truth." My throat tightened. I turned the page, and the truth hit me harder than anything before. According to Dad's records, Ethan's debt wasn't $5,800. That was only the amount Dad knew about. The real total exceeded $12,000. I felt sick, but that wasn't the worst part, not even close. Because several pages later, I found proof that Ethan had been using family members' names to secure loans, without their knowledge, including mine. I stopped breathing. My name appeared multiple times. Applications, documents, financial records. I couldn't believe it. Ethan hadn't just been irresponsible, he had committed fraud, and someone helped him. Mom. The evidence was undeniable. Signed documents, transfers, written notes, dates. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. For years, Mom had protected Ethan, not from bad luck, from consequences. I sat there staring at the pages, unable to process it. My own mother, the woman who taught me right from wrong, the woman who raised me, had knowingly helped hide the truth. Then I found the final section. The section Dad had clearly intended me to see. A letter, addressed directly to me. I took a deep breath and began reading. "Sarah, if you're reading this, then you found the notebook." Tears immediately blurred my vision. "First, I need you to know something important. None of this is your fault." I swallowed hard. "You spent your life trying to save this family. But some people don't want to be saved." My chest tightened. I kept believing Ethan would change. I kept believing your mother would stop protecting him. I was wrong. The words hurt because they were true. Painfully true. Then came the final paragraph. The paragraph that changed my life forever. "Do not sacrifice your future to protect people who are willing to sacrifice yours." I broke down crying. Because Dad understood everything, even before I did. He knew exactly what kind of choice I would eventually face, and now that choice was here. Protect my family, or protect the truth. For the first time in my life, I chose the truth. A week later, I invited everyone to a family gathering. Mom, Ethan, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. Nobody knew why. They would soon find out. The moment everyone sat down, I placed the thick red notebook in the center of the table. The reaction was instant. Mom turned pale. Ethan looked like he'd seen a ghost. And that's when I knew. They recognized it immediately. "Where did you get that?" Ethan whispered. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the notebook and started reading. One page after another, one record after another, one lie after another. The room became silent, completely silent. No excuses, no denials, no arguments, because the evidence spoke for itself. By the end, several relatives were crying. Others were furious. Some simply sat in stunned silence. Then something happened I never expected. My mother stood up. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, she told the truth. "I'm sorry." The room froze. Mom started crying. "I thought I was protecting my son." Her voice broke. "But I was destroying my daughter." I didn't say anything, because some wounds are too deep for instant forgiveness. Then Ethan stood up. Without saying a word, he walked out, and nobody stopped him. For once in his life, he had to face the consequences himself. 1 year later, life looks very different now. Sophie is thriving. My business is stronger than ever. Rachel remains one of my closest friends. As for Mom, we're rebuilding slowly, very slowly. Trust takes time, but at least now it's built on truth. And the thick red notebook? It sits inside a secure glass case in my office. Not as a reminder of betrayal, as a reminder of something more important. The truth always matters, even when it hurts, even when it costs you people you love, even when standing alone feels terrifying. Because sometimes, choosing the truth is the only way to finally choose yourself.